You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Well, I am doing today's Peter Schiff Show podcast with an hour of trading left to go in the U.S. stock market. Normally, I wait for the market to close, and then I do a podcast so I can kind of talk about what happened during the day. But this is such, I think, an important day that I wanted to go live while the market was still trading so I can comment on what happens during the final hours. And I'm not really talking about the Dow Jones or the NASDAQ, because what's going on there, I think, is really irrelevant to the bigger picture, which is what's playing out in precious metals, in the dollar, and probably more significantly for my clients and me personally, in gold and silver mining stocks. Because today, I think intraday, I really saw some major institutional flows coming in across the board into these mining stocks. They all kind of surged at the same time. There was no news, but I think a bunch of money came in, and then there was a pullback, and of course then we just gradually made new highs, and we have some magnificent gains today in the mining stocks that led the metal. In fact, the metals were barely up earlier in the day when the gold and silver stocks were so strong. The metals eventually followed the stocks higher, which is the way it should be. And as I'm recording this podcast here with, a little under an hour to go on Thursday, gold is at record territory. It's trading around 4,920. We are less than $100 away from $5,000 gold. And, we're still not finished with January. Silver is over 96, up better than $3 today. Remember, last year I said that silver would hit $100 an ounce this year. I didn't realize it would do it in January, but that's what's going to happen. And the catalyst, I think, for today's surge, which is also being accompanied by some across-the-board weakness in the U.S. dollar, and it's really a flight out of the dollar into gold and silver. And I think the institutions now are recognizing, finally, maybe the significance of this and how cheap the gold and silver mining stocks are, which is why they're making a mad dash to buy them today, and why you're seeing so many gains of 5 or 10% or more across the board in the mining stocks. They're pretty much all at new multi-year highs today. But the catalyst was Donald Trump's speech at Davos yesterday and his announcement later in the day that followed that speech. And, of course, he also made another speech the day before, just a press conference to commemorate his first year in office. But I think the bigger speech on the world stage was the one that happened yesterday at Davos. Now, the biggest news that initially came out of that speech was that Donald Trump was not going to invade Greenland. He wasn't going to take it by force, which is what he had been stating he was going to do. In fact, the last podcast I did was specifically on this fact that Donald Trump was threatening to take by force Greenland if he couldn't negotiate a deal for the U.S. to own Greenland. He was going to take it because we could, because we were the biggest, strongest economy with the biggest military. And if we want something, we take it, right? And I talked about the dangers of that. And I think there were some people who recognized that this was a big problem. And so before Trump took the microphone yesterday, gold was up over $100. Right? So, I mean, it had been going up every day. At that point on Wednesday, it was up more than $250 on the week. Now it's up over $300, I think. Yeah, it's up over $300 so far this week. I mean, unbelievable. But, you know, before he took the microphone, gold was up 100, silver was up as well. The gold and silver stocks were up. As soon as he said that he wasn't going to take Greenland by force, the markets breathed a sigh of relief. You saw the stock market, the Dow, which was negative, rallied. And the metals came off. And what Donald Trump said was that the U.S. still needs Greenland. We need to own Greenland. We want Greenland. And we are going to negotiate a deal with Denmark, right, to get Greenland. And he said that if we can get Greenland, then we will be grateful or appreciative or something like that. And then he said, but if we don't get it, we'll remember. That's what he said. We'll remember. Not we'll invade. Our troops are coming in, but we'll be happy if we get Greenland. And if we don't, well, you know, I'm going to hold a grudge, right? Because who knows what that means, right? If I don't get it, you know, things are not going to go so well for you, right? I mean, you pissed me off. You're on my bad side, is basically what he said. But that's a lot better than being on the other side, you know, of the guns, right? So, and I believe that cooler heads at the White House probably prevailed in convincing the president behind the scenes that invading Greenland was not such a good idea. In fact, what wasn't a good idea was even discussing it as if it were possible, letting the world know that this is something that we might do. Because even though Trump, you know, tacoed out on this invasion, the seed is planted in the minds of everybody. Wait a minute. This time they didn't do it. What about next time? Right? We got to do something to make sure there is no next time. Now, and in fact, too, the funny thing is when he was talking about Greenland, I mean, he tried to downplay what he's asking for, right? Because he said, look, it's not that big an ask, you know, it's just a piece of ice, right? Who cares about Greenland? And he kind of admitted that, you know, it's not about the natural resources because they're really, you know, buried too deep beneath the ice to really have any value. He said it's all strategic. We need to have a base there. We need to, you know, to protect America. We need to protect the world. But as he's talking about Greenland and say how it's just a piece of ice, all of a sudden he talks about Iceland, right? And then I'm thinking, Iceland, what's going on with Iceland? And he mentioned Iceland a couple of times before it dawned on me that he meant Greenland, that he was now confusing Greenland with Iceland. I assume he knows that there's another country that's actually called Iceland. I mean, even though he referred to Greenland as a big piece of ice, it's not Iceland because there's actually another country that has that name. So I was a little confused initially about like, what the hell, you know, how did Iceland get involved until I realized that he was just mixing them up. But that wasn't the only kind of embarrassing part of his speech. I mean, the whole speech was an hour of rambling. I mean, most of it was just a bunch of lies about the U.S. economy and how great everything is, and just bragging about accomplishments that he really, didn't achieve. But it was all about how great he is, but also how great the United States is, and how the rest of the world is nothing without us. And I'm gonna get to that a little bit more in a minute because I want to just go back to what happened with the markets yesterday. So after the speech finally ended, right, and then he did some Q&A. So it wasn't just an hour. When you add the Q&A, it was like at least 90 minutes, right, of this rambling on. But later in the day, there was an announcement. I guess Trump put it out on Truth Social. He said, hey, I had a great talk with NATO, and we've got the makings of a framework of a deal or something like that on Greenland. And so no tariffs. I'm calling off the tariffs that were supposed to hit February 1st. No tariffs on Europe, all those countries that I was going to tariff, right? Now that I've got this framework of some kind of deal, everything is fine. This is, less than 24 hours, before nothing was fine, right? And, these tariffs were going to stay in place. Then they were going to go up to 25%. If we didn't get to own Greenland, now I'm making a mistake. But I thought that, the markets, right, tanked when this happened, right? Gold almost went negative, not quite. It got down to, I think, up less than $10 before rebounding up about $50. Silver did go negative. It went, negative a couple of bucks. And the gold stocks lost a lot of their gains. And I think that spooked a lot of people because they thought, the reason gold was up, the reason silver was up is because people were afraid that we actually would invade Greenland. I never thought that we would invade Greenland. The problem that I had was the fact that we put that possibility out there, right? That we let the world know that we could invade Greenland. And if we did, there's nothing anybody can do about it. That's basically what Trump said, right? It's just our own benevolence, right? You just have to trust, that I wake up in a good mood. Because if I wake up in a bad mood, you never know, right? Where we could invade. And so that was the big problem, not the fact that we were going to invade Greenland, but the fact that we actually discussed it openly as if it was going to happen or as if it might happen. That was the problem. And so the sell-off that we had yesterday helped lay the foundation for this huge rally today because it gave people the opportunity to buy a dip. And now today we have this huge rally to new all-time record highs in gold and silver, a strong day in the mining stocks, and weakness across the board in the U.S. dollar. Because, anybody who actually watched that speech and watched the president, right, basically tell the whole world that they're nothing without America. America is everything and the world is nothing. That without America, the world doesn't even work, right? That countries can't even survive. Trump talked about the fact that he could bankrupt other countries. He said, I thought about maybe bankrupting Switzerland, by jacking up the tariffs and making them really high and putting them out of business. Like he actually thinks that when he puts tariffs on these countries, the countries pay these tariffs. He thinks that America can destroy every country simply by taxing them with tariffs, right? And that the world doesn't work without America because Americans do all the shopping. Americans are the buyers. We're the ones that borrow all this money. In fact, he said that he thinks we should have the lowest interest rates in the world, as if he's almost ordering it, because he thinks we're so vital to the global economy. We're so important that we should be able to borrow at a lower rate than anybody anywhere else in the world. I don't know how he plans on trying to bring that reality about. But if you watched it, the reaction that I would have is, I'm getting out of U.S. assets. This is ridiculous. And I'm going to sell U.S. stocks. He bragged about the U.S. stock market. He predicted it was going to double, right? That Dow was going to go to 100,000. He says it's going to hit 50,000, then it's going to double. He was very proud of the fact that the stock market keeps going up. Now, it wasn't that everything the president said was a lie or just a gross exaggeration or, about embellishing his accomplishments. There were a few true statements that sprinkled around. Like he did mention the fact that growth doesn't cause inflation, which is true. It doesn't cause inflation. And he did mention that growth can fight inflation, which it does. Growth lowers prices, right? That's what it does. Real economic growth leads to lower prices. The problem is we don't have real economic growth under Trump. We just have more fake economic growth. So if we had genuine prosperity, then yes, the inflation would not be a concern. But he kept repeating the fact that there's no inflation at all, that he's brought down the budget deficit by, 27%, the trade deficit by 77%. This stuff isn't true. I mean, maybe if you go from the high point of the trade deficit to the low point of the month where we had a massive export of gold and it just skewed the whole numbers, maybe that could be close to true. But it's disingenuous in that the trade deficit is still going to be over $1 trillion. He said, we had a record trade deficit last year. Yeah, we had record trade deficits every time he was president the first time. And we're still going to have trade deficits over $1 trillion. And, we actually got inflation news that came out today. We got the personal consumption expenditures. And in there you have the PCE, which is the Fed's favorite way to measure inflation. Right? Now, I think it's the favorite because it's the least accurate, because I think it understates it the most. But it came out hotter than expected. Year over year, the PCE is up 3%. And even the core, if you strip out food and energy, the core PCE year over year is up 3%. They were expecting 2.7. 3% is 50% above their target. And it's rising. What is this telling you? Rates are too low. Donald Trump wants them to be lower. The Fed is talking about cutting them, but the markets are screaming that they need to be raised. And that's another reason that gold and silver prices are soaring, because the precious metals markets are letting everybody know that interest rates are too low. They need to be much higher, but they're not going to go higher. They're not going to get raised at all, for a number of reasons. And so this bull is just getting started. And I know there are people that are saying, well, maybe isn't it like 2011, when gold peaked out at 1900 and silver was like 45, 46? No, because 2011 was following a 10-year period where silver went up 10x. Silver went from under $5 to almost $50. Gold went from under 300 to 1900. We went sideways for 12 years. Gold just broke out last year. 2024 was the first year of this move for gold. 2025 was the first year for silver. We are early in the breakout. We have years and years ahead of this move and multiples of the current move. And really, the mining stocks are just in the process of breaking out. Their breakout year is 2026, even though they had a great year in 2025, even though they tripled. The silver stocks tripled, or the mining stocks at least more than doubled. But even though they did that, their earnings went up much more than the stock price. So they ended the year cheaper than they began. So I think this is the year that they're going to finally really accelerate. And so we're early. Anyway, I got a quick commercial break. I got a lot more to talk about from the president's speech, so stick around. We're coming right back. Going online without ExpressVPN is like printing your social security number on your business card. You're just broadcasting sensitive personal data to whoever wants to take it. Every time you connect to a public network, airports, hotels, cafes, you're putting your data at risk. Hackers can intercept it without much effort. And yes, even a smart 12-year-old with cheap hardware could do it. Your data is valuable. Hackers can make up to $1,000 per person selling personal info on the dark web. Your passwords, bank logins, even credit card details, all vulnerable. That's why I use ExpressVPN. Their encryption is so strong, it would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to crack it. It works on all my devices, phone, laptop, tablet, and it's easy. One tap and I'm protected. I use it anytime I'm traveling, on public Wi-Fi, even at home and work. It gives me peace of mind that my data, and by extension, my finances, aren't being hijacked behind the scenes. Now at the lowest price ever. Plans start at just $3.49 a month. That's only 12 cents a day. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/gold. That's expressvpn.com/gold to find out how you can get up to 4 extra months. expressvpn.com/gold. All right, so we are back. The markets are live. Gold is at a new, fresh, all-time high right now. It's trading above 4,925. up better than $94 so far today. Silver also right on the highs, up $3.18. We're at $96.16. Look, it's not going to be much longer where you could buy silver below $100. So, don't wait. And gold, it won't be below 5,000 for long. So you got to go to Schiff Gold. You got to buy yourself some gold and silver. And again, on the silver, buy it before we run out. I can see the shortages are coming for silver. There's just not going to be the product. There's just too big a demand. The demand for physical precious metals has been very muted over the last few years because people didn't realize what was going on. And in fact, a lot of people that might have bought gold or silver ended up buying Bitcoin. And I feel really bad for these Bitcoiners. Bitcoin is down again. Bitcoin is 89,500. It's not going anywhere. It's relatively flat on the year. Last year was my best year ever as an investor for my entire portfolio, right? And it was the best year that I had as a professional money manager for the entire portfolio, right? We killed it. We hit the ball out of the park, right? It was in a phenomenal year in 2025. And Bitcoin went down last year. This year is already off to a much better start. The returns that we're getting in January alone are incredible. And January isn't even over. And the people who are sitting in Bitcoin, not only did they miss out on all the gains from 2025, they're missing out on all these gains from 2026. And as big as the gains were last year, I actually think they're going to be bigger this year, as amazing as that is, because people think, how the hell can you beat last year? Because last year was so strong. Well, I think we're going to beat it. And of course, as far as the amount of money that customers will make who have these strategies, we're starting from a much bigger base. So even if the return percentage-wise isn't as big as last year, the dollar value of the gain will be bigger because we're starting from a bigger number. But I actually think the percentage gains can be bigger too. This is an explosive year, I think, and Bitcoin is just going sideways. And, even though it hasn't crashed yet, and I'm surprised that the bottom hasn't dropped out yet, but it will. But if you're sitting there in Bitcoin and you feel good because it hasn't crashed, the losses that you are experiencing right now is the opportunity cost. While you're sitting in your Bitcoin hoping that Bitcoin goes up, you're missing what actually is going up. You don't own any gold. You don't own any silver. And you don't own any mining stocks. The GDX right now is up, 4% on the day. The GDXJ is up 6%. So we're getting a bigger move in the mid-tier stocks now. And there's a lot of mining stocks that are up. Look at the silver stocks having a great day. Endeavor Silver up 11%. Hecla Mining up 9%. First Majestic up 8.5%. Pan American Silver up 8%. This is just today. And there are a lot of gold stocks. I think the best gold stock I own today is New Gold. That's up 13%. It's at a new 52-week high on New Gold. I just want to throw this out there. I mentioned a small silver stock that I owned because it was up 40%. I should have qualified that it's very thin, because I think people went out and bought it because at one point yesterday it was up 70%. Now, it pulled back, but now it's up big again today. So even if you bought the high yesterday, you're not doing that bad. But if I don't actually tell you to buy the stock, don't just rush out and buy it. I mean, next time, I mentioned I Am Gold because that was my top performer. It was up 15% that day in the gold stocks. It's up another 4% today. That one, that's a much bigger company. My audience is not going to have any impact on that. But if it's a smaller, thinly traded stock, a bunch of my guys just rush out there. You got to be careful with those stocks. You got to use limits. That's why I really prefer when you're going to buy these little ones like that too. Buy my fund. Get into my gold fund, because we already got this great portfolio. We're about a third junior miners. So you could get great exposure to little companies like that one without actually having to buy them, without having to worry about, moving the market, right? Just go in. In fact, obviously, if you're watching this live, you can go and buy my gold fund today before the close, right? Of course, it's going to be way up today, but I think it's going to be up even more tomorrow, and I think up again on Monday. Maybe the next down day will be Tuesday, if I had a guess. But EPGIX is the symbol for my gold fund. But again, remember, it's risky. You can lose money in gold stocks, right? But, you're not going to make any money, big money, unless you're willing to risk losing some money. But as I've been saying, this entire rally, that the upside potential so dwarfs the downside risk that you just got to do it, right? It's a risk that is worth taking because you can make so much more, even if you lose everything, even if all the gold stocks go bankrupt, which is really not even remotely possible. So, but, they could go down 50%, 60%, 70%, right? That's possible. Who cares? They can still go up 1,000%, more from here, because this is a game changer. I was watching on CNBC an interview with Ray Dalio, who's over there at Davos, and he kind of sugarcoated it and didn't really want to, be that much of an alarmist. But he came out and he said that this is a change. What we are living through right now is a change in the monetary order. And he said that central banks are getting out of fiat. Now, central banks create fiat. What he really meant is that they're getting out of dollars, because that is the reserve. So what is changing is we're not going to back up one fiat with another fiat. We're going to back up fiat with real money. And what's that? That's gold. And that's what Ray Dalio understands, right? And he explained that without trying to be a gloom and doomer, right? But he laid it out. Most people watching CNBC probably went right over their head, and they went right back to the Mag 7. The magnificent stocks now are all miners, right? People don't get that yet. But he's basically saying the same thing. He recognizes this. This is a game changer. And again, when Donald Trump told the world yesterday at Davos that the whole world revolves around us, America, that the world is nothing without America, that we hold your fate, in our hands. We decide. If we want to bankrupt the world, we'll bankrupt the world. If we want to invade a country, we're going to invade a country, right? So you just better hope that we're nice and that we continue to bless the world with this American benevolence, right? The whole world only works because of us. The whole world is only safe because of us. That's what he said. And what he really meant was because of me, Donald Trump, right? Because he kind of takes credit for everything good that's happening in America, because he says just last year when Biden was president, we were a dead country. Nobody cared about us, right? We were completely dead. We were we're the worst economy in the history of the world. And now he says we have the greatest economy in the history of the world. He said we're about to grow like no country has ever grown before. He said that we're going to have the strongest GDP growth in world history. Forget about, whatever they had in China or what we had, in the 19th century. It's all because of his policies, right, that have unleashed this massive growth. Everything that's been unleashed is in his mind, right? There's none of this is in reality. But the world is listening, right? The biggest investors in the world are in the audience. And you know what? They probably got out of this like, I'm out of here. Like I'm selling this stuff. But I think what he did, and he antagonized, right, everybody in Europe, all these countries, right? You're nothing without us. And I think the reaction is going to be, oh, really? Oh, really? Like, we need America. The world needs America like it needs a hole in the head, right? The reason that Trump thinks that we're so vital and important is because we buy everything. That is a privilege. We are not the engine of the world economy. We are the caboose. We get to enjoy what everybody else produces, right? That is a privilege. And we're about to have that privilege revoked. And the world is going to be better off when you sever the caboose from the train. The rest of the train will move faster, right? When the dollar tanks, what happens to American purchasing power? It doesn't disappear. It reappears someplace else. It's transferred to other countries. So the way to make America less important is to devalue the dollar, right? And allow that purchasing power to be transferred to the people who actually earn it. The people who are entitled to consume are those who produce. We don't produce, right? Some of us do, but the vast majority of Americans do not, right? We consume. The people who do produce have been consuming a lot less because of the relative exchange rate differentials. That is in the process of changing. So the world is going to move away from the dollar, and a big part of that, right, is buying gold, replacing U.S. dollar reserves with gold. And once gold is the reserve, nobody needs dollars. You don't need dollars to buy our products because, we have huge trade deficits. And the world is going to take America down several pegs because we just threw it in their face. Donald Trump just gave the world several reasons to do what it should have done a long time ago, right? To just, you remember my analogy in my book in Crash Proof about the 5 Asians and an American on an island. And if you don't know the analogy, it was that, there's a shipwreck and 5 Asians and an American are marooned on this island. And when they get to the island, they have to divvy up the chores, right? And so one of the Asians is going to have the job of, foraging, around the forest and the island, and trying to get wood and stuff for a fire. Another guy is going to try to find vegetables, fruits that might be on the island. Another one is going to try to hunt and see if there's any game that they can kill. Another one is going to be fishing, try to see if they can catch some fish. Right? They're all just trying to survive. They're trying to make a meal. And then when they got to the American, they said, okay, well, what's the American's job going to be? And the American gets assigned the job of eating, right? And so all day long, all these Asians are out there hunting and fishing and farming and gathering, while the American is lying on the beach working on his tan, right? And then at the end of the day, they all get together and they prepare this huge meal for the American to eat. And then, the American eats, but he realizes that the Asians have to eat something because he needs them to go out tomorrow and prepare another meal for him. So the Asians are just given just whatever crumbs the American doesn't eat, right? Just so they don't starve to death. So they're able to go out and hunt and fish and farm and cook tomorrow while the American, suns himself on the beach waiting to be fed, right? And, so the American, according, to Trump, the American is the key to the whole island. That without the American, the island doesn't work because without the American, all the Asians would be unemployed. They'd have nothing to do all day because the American is the one that does all the eating. I mean, these guys barely eat anything, right? And so if it wasn't for Americans, these Asians would have nothing to do all day, right? But of course, the best thing the Asians can do is kick that fat American's ass right off that island, right? Because if they don't have to feed the American, they have a lot more food for themselves, or they don't have to work as hard because they don't need to spend all day hunting and gathering. They can spend some of their time lying on the beach, right? Swimming and working on their tan, right? So this is what's going to happen. The world now is kicking America off this island. And Donald Trump went right into Europe and basically gave them all the reasons to do it, right? And we're going to see now. America is going to see, Trump's going to see just how little the world needs America and how much America not only needs the world, but depends on the world. This great economy that Donald Trump thinks he's created, we're the ones that depend on the kindness of the rest of the world. The only reason we can afford these big battleships that he's talking about, this huge military, is because the world finances it. They loan us all the money. If we couldn't borrow all this money from the rest of the world, you think we'd have all this money? And Trump wants to greatly increase the military budget right now by a huge amount, right? That can't happen unless the rest of the world is going to make it possible, by buying our debt and subsidizing our trade deficits. Well, this is going to come to an end, and people are starting to recognize this, right? If Ray Dalio could see it, he's not the only one. And there is real money now moving into these stocks, right? So, it's out of the bag, right? And I don't care that he called off this invasion, because that's not what it's about. It's much bigger than that. Now, one other thing I want to talk about that I thought was very interesting, in the speech. And he talked about a lot of stuff, making the U.S. the crypto capital, and he bragged about crypto. And he talked about, the big, beautiful bill and no tax on tips and no tax on overtime and no tax on Social Security. Yes, all that is highly inflationary. The last thing we needed was to cut taxes on people who are just going to spend more money, right? Yes, I feel bad that waiters and retirees are struggling. Yes, they're struggling because of big government inflation, but just cutting their taxes while you don't cut government spending is going to make the inflation problem that they're struggling with worse. Of course, Trump talked about firing government workers and cutting government spending, but that was all a lie, right? Government is spending more. I mean, these cuts, again, they exist in the president's mind, not in actual reality. The government is spending more money, not less money. All that's down is their tax collection. And as a result, the budget deficits are rising. But I thought one of the most interesting admissions that he made was about housing. And he talked a lot about housing. But he basically admitted that there was a housing bubble. And he admitted that his main goal is to prevent it from popping, to make sure that none of the air comes out of the housing bubble. Now, what he said, and first he said that nobody else talks about this, like he's the only one, right? Obviously, I mean, I talk about it, right? But I don't count, right? Because, I'm a jerk, Trump-hating loser. But he said the thing that nobody talks about is that if we make houses more affordable through lower prices, we're going to harm the people who already own houses. Yes, of course. I've been talking about that for a long time. And then Trump said, I want to protect those people. I care about those people. He said, there's a lot of people that are walking around now that are so proud of the fact that their house is worth $500,000, $600,000, that they've never been so rich because their houses are so expensive. And he said that if, house prices come down so that younger people can afford to buy, we're going to hurt the older people who already own homes. And I care about those people. I don't want them to lose their home equity. So his priority is not making houses affordable, but keeping them expensive so that the people who own them don't have to lose when the price goes down. Now, of course, if people can't afford to buy homes, right, because the prices are too high, what does that tell you about the prices? They're unsustainable, right? If people can't afford to buy homes, that means the people who own homes can't sell them, right? So if you can't sell your home, then it's not really worth what you think it is. So the guy that's walking around talking about how much his house is worth, but he can't find anybody who's willing to buy it, proves it isn't worth what he thinks it is. Now, what Trump wants to do is maintain the illusion that houses are worth these high prices, right? Because he doesn't want people to have to deal with the reality that they're not as rich as they thought. And he also mentioned the other thing that I talk about is that if we allow home prices to come down, which would make them more affordable, a lot of people are going to default on their mortgages because they're going to lose their home equity, and now the banks are going to lose money. So Trump's primary concern, which he admitted, is current homeowners not losing their phony paper wealth and banks not losing on their mortgages, right, including all the ones that are guaranteed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and all the mortgages that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are now buying, right? A lot of those mortgages may end up in default if home prices come down to a level where people can actually afford to buy them. So what is Trump's solution to this dilemma, right? How do I allow people to overpay for homes that they can't afford, yet still buy them, so that the prices can stay high for all the people that still own them? The only way that you could do that is through massive inflation, right? And through manipulation of interest rates, pushing interest rates down so that instead of lower prices, you have lower borrowing costs. And so that is what brings down your monthly payment, right? But of course, you also have the problem with the down payment, because the higher the price of the house, the more money you have to come up with to make a down payment. But one of the brilliant things that Trump apparently came up with was to ban large institutions from buying single-family homes. And he signed an executive order to that effect, and he bragged about that in Davos yesterday. Now, I read the executive order, and it's not exactly the way Trump describes it. There isn't an outright ban on large institutions buying homes. First of all, if they're buying the homes directly from the developers and the developer is building them specifically so the institutions can buy them and rent them out, then that's okay. Also, if you're a private individual and you're just going to sell your house to a large institution who's going to pay you all cash, those transactions are allowed, right? There's nothing to prevent that. So what does the executive order actually do? Well, if there is a loan that is in foreclosure, right? Let's say a government, an FHA or a Fannie or Freddie insured loan goes into foreclosure, right? And the house is being auctioned off in foreclosure. They're not supposed to allow the large institutions to buy at the foreclosures. And so what is the actual effect of this policy? It means that when a loan goes into foreclosure and the bank has to sell the house, it's going to sell that house at a lower price because you've taken a lot of the buyers out of the foreclosure market. Now, of course, once somebody else buys the home, they could flip it to an institution, but the initial buy on the courthouse steps is not going to be a large institution. It's going to be a smaller institution or an individual. But it really means that the banks are going to take bigger losses. The mortgage lenders are going to take bigger losses on their properties if they go into foreclosure. Now, so what does that mean, right? If banks know, gee, if I have to foreclose on this property and I have to sell the house and I can't sell it to a big institution and they're the big buyers, I'm going to get less money. What does that mean? Well, that means I got to charge higher interest rates on the mortgage because I'm going to lose more money if this thing goes into foreclosure. So the opposite of what Trump wants. Like, they never look at the unintended consequences of anything. It's just why Trump doesn't understand the 10% cap on mortgage rates. I mean, on credit card interest rates, which he also bragged about at Davos, that banks are ripping us off, right? When he says that, he sounds like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, right? The banks are scamming people and ripping us off, and they're overcharging. And so the government has to come in, because I don't believe in capitalism. I don't believe in the free market, because capitalism is about ripping people off and screwing people over. And so we need the government to come in. But when you put a 10% cap on credit card rates, as I said before, all you've done is you've made sure that people who are a greater risk of default can't borrow money on their credit card, because the banks, the lenders, are going to stop extending credit if they can't cover the costs. The credit card industry is highly competitive, one of the most competitive industries out there. I mean, how many, offers do you get every day in the mail from credit card companies, right? I mean, they're so made. It's cutthroat competition. There's so many perks and so many things they offer you to sign up for a credit card and to transfer your balance from another company, right? I mean, it's very competitive. If you could make money charging 18%, somebody would do it. And if you could make money at 16%, somebody would do that. The reason that the market is settled around 20% is because that's where the market is. That's what you've got to charge to have a reasonable return on the capital that you outlay on a credit card business. And so if the government says you can only charge 10%, well, they have to say, okay, the credit card companies, which of our customers can we trust not to default? We need to really reduce our default rate dramatically so that we can be profitable at 10%. And that means that the people that Trump seems to care about the most are going to be the ones who are going to be hurt the most because they're going to lose access to credit cards. Now, does that mean they're going to lose access to credit? No, they'll just borrow from somebody else at an even higher rate, right? Because the president's not capping other companies, what they can charge, just the credit card companies. So consumers will have to take their next best alternative and borrow from somebody else and pay an even higher rate. So what is the effect of the policy? Is that people are going to end up paying more than 20% or whatever they pay now because you capped what the credit cards can charge. People are going to have to turn to an alternative source that's going to give them an even worse deal than the one they were getting before, right? That's, again, the most dangerous words in the English language, or I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. And what Trump is doing is going to be harmful, not helpful. I'm looking at the market again. Gold's kind of stabilized here around the 49.20 level, up about $90. We still only got about 9 minutes left to go, and I'll try to just hang around and see where these markets close. The Dow is still up about 300 points, which is really nothing in the scheme of things, right? The media will report, oh, it's an up day in the Dow. The Dow is up 0.6%, right? But gold is up 2%. So what does that tell you? Right? Is the Dow really up? No, it's not. Right? It's actually down. If you price it in real money, it's way down. And in fact, if you price it in foreign currencies today, it's also about a push maybe, depending on which currency. The Australian dollar is up more than a full percent today. So if you're an Australian and you have the Dow Jones, you've lost Aussie dollars today, right? Even though the U.S. stock market is up, if your account is in Australian dollars, you have fewer Australian dollars today than you had yesterday because you were in the U.S. stock market. And this is going to accelerate as the dollar really starts to weaken. I mean, if Trump's only goal is a higher stock market, he's going to achieve that, right? But only because of a weaker dollar. So higher stock prices are going to be irrelevant when, your grocery prices are going up a lot faster, right? So when you go to the supermarket, the prices go up a lot more than they do at the stock market. And of course, the problem for a lot of people is they only go to the supermarket. They're not in the stock market. A lot of Americans don't own stocks, right? So they don't even offset some of what they lose at the supermarket in the stock market. I mean, their wages are just getting eviscerated. Whatever savings they have is getting eviscerated to inflation. And so all of this stuff is falling apart. And it's ironic. And not just even ironic, but it's extremely problematic that this collapse is happening as Trump is, trumpeting around the world how great the economy is, how America is back, how it's better than ever, how it's bigger than ever, how it's stronger than ever, right? It's like he's like Baghdad Bob in Iraq, talking about how Iraq is winning the war or everything is great, when American tanks are all over the place in the background, taking over the whole country. And he's oblivious to what's going on, and he's saying everything is great, Iraq is strong, right? This is what's going on, right? I mean, this, the U.S., the ship of state is sinking. And Donald Trump is at the helm, talking about how safe and sound the ship is, like it's the unsinkable Titanic, right? It's the best it's ever been, and he's going down, right? And he's going to be saying this until he's completely submerged, right, in water, until he could, he's bubbling, is because he's now, up to his neck in water as the ship of state is sinking, and he continues to cling to the illusion that everything is great. right? And because he is the captain. That is what's going on. And again, we are going to get, and when I say we, the Republicans, are going to get crushed in these midterms. As bad as the Democratic Party is, Trump is going to revive them. And the Republican ass kissers who get behind Trump. Like even when Trump was talking about invading Greenland, you couldn't find Republicans to come out and say, now that's a crazy idea, right? We really need Greenland. The president is on to something, right? We got to get Greenland. This is really important, right? Really? Nobody could even criticize. Now, obviously, I think behind the scenes, and I think what happened too behind the scenes was they were looking at the bond market. Treasury yields were going yippee again, right? Bond yields were rising, and gold was rising. And I think some of his advisors came in and said, the markets are not liking this, sir. And since you're concerned about the markets, you really need to dial this back. You need, because then when he talked about military Greenland, he goes, well, I never really meant it. I was never really going to invade Greenland. Well, then why didn't you say that, right? If you didn't mean it, why did you say it over and over again? Why didn't you just make that clear initially? So what, were you lying? I mean, but obviously he meant it, right? Although, I don't know, he always means it, but then he gets confronted with some behind the scenes stuff. But people have to be willing to criticize him, out in the open, I think, because that might be the only way to rein him in. But if all of the Republicans are just cheerleading the president and are just falling into line, right, then the whole party is doomed, right? I mean, because the Republicans are going to own this. They are going to get the blame for this monetary collapse, currency collapse, and the massive inflation that is going to be unleashed. And it's not just rising consumer prices, but rising long-term interest rates that we're going to hit. And the world is going to boom. Again, the difference between the 2008 financial crisis and the 2026 financial crisis, other than the fact that this one's going to be bigger, is going to be this is an American crisis. It's not a global financial crisis. It's global relief. It's a burden being lifted from the backs of the global economy, where the world gets to eat the fruits of its own labor, right? And invest its own capital. It doesn't have to subsidize American consumption anymore, right? We are not what makes the global economy work. The global economy is what makes America work, right? We could not survive without the world. Without the world, what do we consume, right? They've got the factories. They've got the infrastructure. They've got the supply chains. They produce all the stuff we consume, right? If you take the world out, what do we got? A bunch of empty shelves, a bunch of strip malls stripped down to nothing, right? And a bunch of printed money. What does the world have without America? All their stuff, everything they produce, it's still there. So what? They're just going to have an excess supply of stuff. Well, that's a good position to be in. If the world has a glut of stuff, what does that mean? That the prices come down. Everybody gets to buy more. That's a good thing. America, we have a shortage of stuff. We have a bunch of people who want stuff and nothing for them to buy. That's a bad situation, right? The rest of the world has more stuff than they've ever had. And so now they can buy a lot more stuff because the exchange rate changes and that brings down the prices. And this is so simple. It's amazing that people haven't figured it out. And, I titled my last podcast, The Real Crash is Here. And it's not here in the sense that this is the crash. It's a process and it started, right? So the real crash is going on right now. My book, The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy, I wrote that book in 2013. And I wrote it really to remind people that my first book, Crash Proof, the crash that I was predicting wasn't what we had in 2008. I predicted what we had in 2008 precisely, right? I knew exactly what would happen and for the exact reason it would happen, and I laid it out. But that wasn't the crash. That was going to be the beginning of what I believed was going to lead to a dollar crisis and a sovereign debt crisis. That was the crash. And that was what my book, Crash Proof, was supposed to protect you from. Not what was going to happen in 2008, but what was going to happen because of 2008, because of what the government was going to do in response to 2008 financial crisis. I knew what the government was going to do before they even knew they were going to do anything. I knew how they were going to respond to a crisis that the government didn't even know was coming. But I already knew not only that the crisis was coming, but I knew the exact mistakes the government would make to try to solve it and that it would make it worse. What I didn't know was how long it would take. I had no idea when I wrote The Real Crash in 2013 that it wouldn't happen for another 13 years, right? And during those 13 years, a lot of people have made fun of me, and they said, oh, you see, Schiff, you don't know what you're talking about. Everything is fine. I knew it wasn't fine. I knew that all the can kicking was allowing all the problems that I knew were going to erupt into a crash to get worse. And by the way, yes, I've waited a long time, but you know what? I have now outperformed by a significant margin the S&P 500 over the last 10 years for myself and my clients, right? And for myself, even more so, because I'm so loaded up with gold and silver mining stocks to a much greater degree that I would advise my clients because of the risk. But in my mind, there was no risk, right? I knew I was right, and I didn't care how long I had to wait. But now it didn't even matter that I'm early because I've now already made more money in my strategy than had I just bought the S&P 500, right? I've done better in the portfolio I created. Now, that wasn't true at the end of 2024. I completely caught up and then got out in front from January of last year to now, right? But now I'm just going to gain further and further in my lead. I'm just going to leave them in the dust now, I think, as far as where we're going to go. So it hasn't cost me money now being early. People will say, well, being early is as good as being wrong. Okay, well, if I'm wrong, why have I made so much money being wrong, right? I'm obviously not wrong if I've made more money than the people who are right. I mean, maybe the only people who made more money than me are the people who bought Bitcoin, right, a long, long time ago. But they're going to lose it all back, so they're going to get theirs. But anybody who bought Bitcoin in the last few years, they're getting crushed. But so if you haven't read my book, The Real Crash, go out and buy it. It's still, it's pretty cheap now on Amazon, but it's more relevant now than it was when I wrote it because what I wrote about is about to happen. And it doesn't matter that I wrote about it 13 years ago. The fundamentals and the outcome are exactly the same. And the investment recommendations I made back then are the same ones that I would make today, right? So everything about investing is right on point. And I also have a lot of solutions in that book. A lot of people say, hey, Peter, you're always pointing out the problems. Where are the solutions? That book is full of solutions, like real things that we could be doing to solve our problems, not the stuff that Trump is doing where he can pretend to solve our problems while he makes them worse, but actual free market reforms that will work, right? So I lay all the stuff out that we need to do in Crash Proof. Anyway, so while I've been talking, the markets have come to a close, and let me look. So a little bit of a selling at the close. I mean, GLD up 1.87%. That's the ETF for gold, a little bit off the highs, not much. Silver ETF 87.12 up 3.76%. Just, a little bit below, I guess a little profit taking from the day traders. They'll be back strong. I think tomorrow will be another big update. The GDX up 3.83%. So a little bit under 4%. The GDXJ up about 5.5%. So the high was up about 6%. So we didn't make new highs into the close. I guess there's still some profit taking there, but these are new highs, new multi-year highs for these indexes. I mean, either it's a new record high. As far as the GDX, this is the highest it's ever been. So this is a record high for that index. But if you look at the GDXJ, it's still below its 2011 high by about 20%. So, gold is triple what it was back then, right? We're 1,900, not quite triple, but more than double, right? Because it's almost 5,000, and back then it was below 2,000. But those stocks are lower than they were back then. Now, that's not going to be for long. I think, certainly by February, in my mind, if not even before the end of January, we'll take out those highs. But then we're going much, much higher because this is a whole new world that we're about to experience, right? We are going back to a world where the U.S. dollar is not the center of the universe here. It's not going to be that everything revolves around us the way Trump believes it is, right? I mean, it's been like that in a sense that, yes, we have been able to consume, luckily, what everybody produced. We have been able to borrow what everybody saves. And so to that degree, we have been an important part of the way the global economy works. But the global economy would have been better off with a different system where they got to consume what they produced. They got to invest what they saved, not Americans. So this is liberation for the rest of the world, and this is a day of reckoning for the United States. So, remember, get your gold and silver now while you can at Schiff Gold. Contact the representatives at Euro Pacific Asset Management and get an account set up. I mean, this is going to be the best January I think we've ever had, but I think 2026 is going to be the best year we've ever had, following the last best year that we've ever had, which was last year. And this is not the end of a trend. This is the beginning. The U.S. was outperforming the global markets from 2011 to 2024. That was a long run that America had. That streak is over, right? And a lot of people are still investing in the rearview mirror. They don't get it. You got to understand what's changed and how that is going to impact your investment returns. So get on the phone with the representatives at Euro Pacific Asset Management. If you already have an account, great, add to it, transfer some more money in. If you don't have an account, what the hell you been waiting for? Get set up. Don't miss any more of this move than you have to, right? Because I think that, this is one train that you can't afford to miss. You got to get on this thing because you got to get out of the dollar. Because if you don't do this right, you don't have a second chance. Once the dollar's purchasing power is gone, it's gone, right? And if all you got is dollars, then you're left with nothing. And this is true also for you crypto guys and you Bitcoin maxis that are holding on to your Bitcoin. You need to get out of it quick. Don't think everything is fine because it's still 89,000, right? When it starts to drop, it's going to drop fast. And if you're not already out, you'll probably never get out. So the best time to get out is right now. And it's very easy if you go to Schiff Gold. Just go to Schiff Gold and you can check out with Bitcoin using BitPay. You could buy real gold. You could buy real silver. And if you sell some Bitcoin, you can go and set up an account at Euro Pacific Asset Management. And if you're a do-it-yourselfer, if you got a brokerage account, if you got any crypto ETFs, in your brokerage account, get rid of them, sell them tomorrow, and, you could get into my mutual funds. You could buy them at any discount broker. You can get all the symbols and all the information and the prospectuses on my website at Europac.com. The gold fund member is EPGIX, is the no-load fund. My dividend payer fund, EPDIX, which was the number one fund in its category last year, up better than 62% out of 300 funds. The strategy is foreign dividend-paying value stocks. And we kicked the crap out of tech stocks last year in, dividend-paying stocks, value stocks. This is a new trend. I think it's going to continue, not just this year, but for many years into the future. So you got to get on board. You got to recognize what's changed, and you got to be proactive, and you got to be quick. Anyway, that's everything for today. I'm probably going to do a Schiff Gold market wrap on Friday, so make sure and look out for that because we could have another huge day in the metals tomorrow. And again, another big weekend with a big gap up on Monday. So bye for now.